large part of what we teach within the Weightess4Life community and Reset program is that sugar and processed carbs are bad for you. The answer to that is the Twin Dragons products. Not only do they not have sugar, but they also don't have processed carbs, and they're really versatile. So we gathered today in Folsom, California with members of our Weightess4Life community, and we showed how versatile these products are. And while people were getting ready and waiting for the demonstration to start, we served BLTs, or actually BLATs, bacon, lettuce, avocado, tomato sandwiches that we made specifically with the Twin Dragons low-carb bread mix. And instead of making just sliced bread, we turned them into focaccia bread. And that gave it the extra seasoning and spice that really amped up the flavor of those BLATs. All right, first of all, thank you all for coming today. This is a long time in the making. Patty and I have been chatting about this for ages. First, we just wanted to get a bunch of people together and cook, because we both love to cook. But we also are, very interested in just using the different mixes because they're easy, and then just turning them into a whole bunch of different things that you can, do without having to measure out 12 different dry ingredients.
Yes.
Each time you're baking something that you want to be sugar-free or low-carb. So, I'm always amazed whenever Patty comes up with something, and I think part 2 is going to be my favorite, which is your bagels. My girls love her bagels. And we're delighted to have Patty Hampton with us here today in order to demonstrate how she uses the Twin Dragons low-carb bread mix to make her fantastic cinnamon rolls. I mean, this is one of those things that the community's been clamoring for because they look so good, and who doesn't love a cinnamon roll? Today we're doing cinnamon rolls, which are fantastic, and every time she posts them, I know you probably feel the same way. It's just, a little drool just drips down the side of my mouth. And so we're here today to use the Twin Dragons mix and make cinnamon rolls, right?
We'll show you how easy it is.
So you're doing cinnamon rolls as well as sticky buns.
Sticky buns,
right?
Yeah.
And so Patty's already done the sticky buns, but she'll show you how to do the variation because the basic steps are the same for both.
Yes, they're the same.
So why don't we start from scratch?
Okay, we're going to start with our Twin Dragon bread mix. So I'm using the bread machine, which makes it really easy because it kneads it for you. And into the bread mix, I'm going to put the 1/3 cup of cream and maple flavoring, melted butter, and then I'm going to slightly beat 2 eggs and put it in there.
And this is the general recipe for the bread mix, which is on the label of the bread mix itself. So far right now, there's been no changes to the actual recipe on the bread mix.
And it's really, really easy. Okay, we have 2 eggs. I want to make sure I don't forget anything. Add our bread mix.
And here's where we vary this just slightly. So on the label, it says to add a cup of water, warm water as well. But instead, what Patty has is a cup of warm water on the side, and she put the yeast into it.
Yes.
I happen to have instant yeast here today, so instant yeast you can throw into like a bread machine and that kind of stuff, and you don't have to bloom it first.
Right.
But in any event,
we just tried this.
The belt and suspenders approach,
Yeah.
So we're blooming the yeast first, and this is the cup of water with the yeast.
Yes.
And that goes right on top of the dry mix.
And then we're just going to put it into our bread machine and let the bread machine do all the kneading.
And Patty, do you use any special setting for that, or is it just?
What you do is, this one's exactly like mine. You put it on a dough setting, so it's just going to knead the bread and not start baking it. Okay, let's see.
Warm water with the yeast?
Yes.
And then how long do you have to split it?
It's usually just a few minutes. Yeah.
Kind of.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, it's usually just a few minutes. I usually do the water with the yeast first, and then you know, and as I'm getting everything else together, that you know, it's usually enough time. Oh, there you go.
There.
It takes two of us.
Okay, it does.
Did you put the cinnamon in? Do you normally put the cinnamon?
I didn't, but you know what? I think I will.
Okay.
I did on the last batch. Maybe I should skip it on this one.
Okay.
We'll see how it...
So one of the variations that Patty does as well is she will put a half teaspoon of cinnamon, half a teaspoon of cinnamon into the actual bread mix as well, you know, as it's mixing. And then that gives it a more of that cinnamon roll, cinnamony taste.
Okay, so I just put it on the dough cycle, and it's just going to knead. And just let it do its work. And you can take a little spoon and scrape down the sides every now and then. And it's really a beautiful dough. So that's what made me so excited about it.
You know, I think you could do either. You know, when I created the recipe for the bread mix, I switched back and forth, and frankly, it made no difference.
No, it didn't.
You know, when I used the bread machine, it made absolutely no difference. And I used, you know, I was very careful about testing whether or not to use an instant versus non-instant, or the quick rise one.
Right.
And so, you know, I think part of it is the reason I bloom it, you know, when I do this, is really just to test the freshness of the yeast. You know, and because a lot of times when people have their yeast sitting around, no one really uses that much yeast, you know, or you may have little packets and then they're there for years. And so if you have bad yeast, then it might not rise, you know, appropriately. So I bloom it just to really to test the yeast.
Yeah. But it works perfectly fine if you do all the wet ingredients and then the bread mix and then the yeast sprinkled on top. It works perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. So my thing is, I think there's been some variability, you know, in terms of whether or not people's bread have risen, you know, and if it comes out flat or not. My sister is notorious to have, you know, she has like these tiny little discs, you know, that are hockey pucks. And, you know, so I think part of that is really the kneading is one of the key things for me, is that sometimes between different machines, they knead slightly differently. And so if you push down and it leaves that imprint but it doesn't bounce back, then it's not quite kneaded enough. And so I'll literally just turn it off, and then I'll turn it right back on and let it run another cycle of kneading before it rises. The second tip, I think, for letting it rise is that, because remember, we're not using a wheat flour. And so wheat flour, when you're making bread with wheat flour, it's 2 to 3 different proofing, you know, times. With an alternative flour like this, proofing it once is more than enough, okay? So that means by the time it goes around second, it rises, and then it breaks it down again before it proofs a third time. Sometimes that actually creates a flatter loaf of bread. So before it goes into its second rising, you know, you'll see it stirred on the second time. I usually will reach in once it's done stirring, and then I'll take out the paddle. So then that way it can't burst, you know, the air pockets that's in the rise, and I let it rise through the second and third, you know, and have it bake all the way through. And then that's usually when my loaves are, you know, really tall and nice and fluffy, you know.
Yeah,
so that's usually the two tips that I would check, you know, other than the basic stuff in terms of having sufficient yeast and fresh yeast, and, you know, and using the right ingredients and that type of thing.
So take out the paddle after the first time.
So you'll hear it going like this, and then it'll go quiet, okay? And usually it's just letting it sit, you know, in order for the ingredients to sort of absorb into the moisture. And so I'll let it sit for the 10 minutes or so, and then it'll run again. It'll knead it again for a second kneading. And as soon as that second kneading ends, then I take the paddle out, you know, and then that's usually, you know, for people who use the mixer, for example, or the hand knead, that's the difference, you know, when you get this beautiful loaf of bread.
Yeah.
As opposed to sometimes using a bread machine that may vary. So the one thing that I check right before it goes into its proofing phase is I'll just put my thumb into it, and then if it springs back very slowly, but it does spring back, then usually that to me is it's enough. It's enough of a knead. And I think, Lindy, you actually make bread, or you did.
Follow it exactly the way.
Oh no, no.
Yeah.
No. But before the program and everything, you used to actually make like real bread, you know, in your kitchen with kneading
In my
and
kitchen with kneading.
right.
Yeah.
And so when you were making
I
like
would
regular
make it
bread,
in my pan and stick it in the oven to make like French loaves.
and how many times would you proof it when you were making regular bread?
3.
Yeah.
Times, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and that I think is the main difference with this type of yeast bread, that is non-flour based, is we want to make sure that it's just not proofing the 3 times, 2 at
That's what I
most.
love about this.
Yeah, it's
You
quicker.
don't have to, yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes I'll just have it kneaded like this, and then I'll take it out. I'll put it into a regular loaf pan, and I'll stick it in the oven with the light on, and then I'll just leave it there for a while, as opposed to baking it in the bread maker. If I want a different shape, for example, or if I want to do something else like focaccia bread, that's when I'll take it. That's the phase that I take it out, is after it runs the second time. That's when I take it out and I roll it flat for these sandwiches. And then I'll cover it and stick it in the oven with the light on, and then let it rise for that first proofing and then bake it. So you don't have to do it 3 times. Okay.
Yeah, that works.
I think Vanessa and I, when we did the pizza party, Vanessa and I together made, I don't know, was it 60 or 70 pizza crusts?
Oh my goodness.
In one afternoon. And
Oh,
we didn't
wow.
proof it at all. So we just mixed it, and then we, shaped it into the pizza, and then we baked it straight, and it puffed and it rose beautifully. As long as you have that little spring in it, then you don't have to even proof that, because it will rise a certain amount. It just won't rise like the bread without the proofing it, So, but for something like pizza, where you're just doing something thin, then just letting it rise is perfect. Okay.
Okay, everybody, we're going to continue here. And our dough is all nice and kneaded. That's a beautiful.
It's good to see that example.
Yeah, and it does spring back. And if if you feel it needs a little more kneading, you can just give it a little more. But this feels great. Look at it. Didn't take that long. Okay, so now at this point, what I'm going to do is try and get it into a rectangular shape. And we'll just start to roll it. Let's see, I'll move that away. I don't know if any of you have a marble rolling pin. It's heavy. It really helps you.
It requires less muscle,
Yes.
to push. So.
About how many cinnamon rolls do you usually get from one dough?
Usually around 10. The last batch I did was 12, but I like them a little bigger and fluffier.
Depends on the size of the cinnamon roll.
Yeah.
So I think patties are about like that big.
Yeah.
Yes.
When they come out. Like a Cinnabon cinnamon roll,
Yeah.
so about 10 of those.
What I've done with my cinnamon rolls is I've cut them in half like a bun, split it in half, and made French toast with them. They're really good. I know. Okay, let's see how that is. Okay, now I'm going to put some butter on there.
Need a
That's
spoon?
kind of warm. Thank you.
So that was how much butter? Half a stick of butter?
Yeah.
So a quarter of a cup.
I do it about an inch away from the edge on this side so that I can do like a seal. And then what I've put in here is the Lakanto Gold and cinnamon.
Do you know how much of each?
You know what? I don't really measure. I did it first, and then it was like too much. For this, I put 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, or maybe 3. You know, as much as you want, and then about 1.5 cups of the gold. But then I used it for 2 batches. So
basically about half a cup of Lakanto Gold for every teaspoon of cinnamon.
Yes.
I think the ratio that Patty's doing.
Yes.
And this is nice because you put it into a jar, shook it up, and then can sprinkle it out this way. So
I had an empty jar, and the top of the Parmesan cheese fit perfect. So I thought, well, let's see.
I do that too.
Yes.
I recycle jars at home.
I think that's enough.
So that's about a cup of Lakanto with 2 teaspoons of cinnamon.
Okay, now I'm going to start to roll from this side. And you want to make it tight so it's not, the air isn't going to get trapped, and then separate all your nice swirls. Thank you. Just put a little bit of water to kind of stick it together. Thank you.
That's a nice roll.
That's nice, yes. Now at this point, what I have done is made it into a cinnamon swirl bread. You can put it in a loaf pan just like this. So now I'm going to cut it. I kind of like to eyeball it.
So you saw Patty pinch the ends.
Yes.
So that's one way so that they don't unroll, you know, as they're rising. Another like a technique that some people do is they actually take the end of it, and then as you flip it flat,
Yes.
you take the end and you actually roll it underneath the cinnamon roll. And then that way the cinnamon and the butter doesn't come all completely out, and it actually keeps it within the cinnamon roll as well.
Oh, I like that.
Just a
Add
thought.
the bottom to it.
Right. So you use the end to actually use, you know, to cover the
Ooh,
bottom.
could you show us on this?
So do you see how there's this end right here? See at the end? You know, so some people, they just really, they roll it
Oh, how
underneath.
cute. I like
And then you
that.
flatten that out so it covers most of the bottom. And so as you're cooking the good tip, right? You know?
Oh, I love
You came here for a
that.
reason.
Now I got my money's worth.
But when you do that, then it holds in a lot of the bottom, you know, and it keeps a lot of that cinnamon inside of the roll. You know. So do you want me to do it for the rest of our day?
Yes. That's great. So how'd you do it?
Oh, I can't even find the end now.
Just
You finished it?
go like
There we
this?
go. Yeah. So I just take it.
Nice.
And I take it, and then I just fold it under. You know, like that.
Should we
Get
butter
flattened
the
a little bit.
bottom of that, or do we have to?
You know what? Here, I will if you normally do.
We do. Boy, see how that dough is so good that it already started to seal. Okay, I'll let you do this. We'll just put them on there.
Perfect. Is there any particular order?
I usually put 4 and then 3.
Okay. Okay.
Or is it 3 and then 3?
Is it 4 and 3? Oh, 3 and 3. Okay.
Did I do that?
Whatever works.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it. And then now we're just going to let
There
them
you go.
rise.
So normally it takes about 45, 50 minutes, sometimes an hour to rise, depending upon how warm the environment is. So while we're doing that, I have the pumpkin scones. If you'd like to see the pumpkin scones, okay. Okay, feel free
And I'll
to-
sit in the audience and
Yeah.
watch.
and or have your sandwich too.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Was it the same dough that you made for the sticky buns, the same exact thing, but you just had a
Yes.
on the bottom?
The same.
Okay.
Yep. So that's a good question. Patty, can you tell me the difference, or tell the group the difference with the sticky buns?
The
how did
sticky
it vary?
buns, what I did was, and it's just the same exact like I
Process.
did, same process. But before I put the rolls in, I put about half of a cup of butter melted on the bottom of the pan and chopped pecans. And then I mixed some of the Lecanto Gold with a little bit of inulin, just so it kind of gives it a more of a stick together kind of thing. And just spread that on the bottom and put your rolls on top and do the same process. Thanks.
So
Do you think we could put these in the oven, Van?
Are they ready?
The first ones?
Yeah. Let's see. Is that puffed enough?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, you want to show everybody?
Sure.
Okay, so these are Patty's first bunch. See how they just puffed?
Yeah.
And so now they're touching each other, whereas before they
Yeah.
weren't. So
And they'll
at this
get
point,
even.
they'll rise some more in the oven, but we'll go ahead and throw these in. Yes?
Yes, for 20 minutes.
20.
On what?
On
It's a
350 for 20.
20 minutes. So in order to make sure that we have enough fat in the cinnamon roll dish itself, in order to meet our macros and have enough fat in it, we've created 2 different types of toppings, both of which are made out of butter and cream cheese. I'm gonna do like a cream cheese frosting. I don't know if anyone else is interested in seeing it. Okay. You wanna see? If you wanna see. So typically what I do, and Patty, you might have a different process. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Bye, Keely. So, just real briefly, I think we all have a different process for, how you want your cream cheese topping. I like to start out mine like I do for like a cream cheese icing. And there's a lot of different variations on how people do cream cheese icings. Some people use straight cream cheese and then Lecanto, or some sort of a powdered sugar base, and then a little bit of vanilla. I like mine with a mixture of butter and cream cheese together, so it's tends to be my favorite. So what we do is, I think the perfect ratio that I found, is, let's see here. Is 1 part butter, 2 parts cream cheese. Okay, so this is a 1/4 cup of butter, so I would go with a 1/4 cup of butter to a 1/2 cup of cream cheese. Okay, so make sure that they're both softened. Then I'm just going to eyeball this. Normally at home, I would actually use a scale, to make sure that I had exactly 8 ounces of cream cheese in here, for every stick of butter. There you go. But it's not necessary. So you want to whip the butter and the cream cheese first together. let it run for a little bit to get it nice and fluffy. And if I had a spatula, I would scrape it down with a spatula. But I forgot to bring one of those today. But you want to scrape it down on the edges, on the sides here. And you see how it's nice and fluffy, you know. So you want to go and really whip it until it's nice and fluffy. And then that's when I usually will add the vanilla. And then incorporate the vanilla and then the sweetener afterwards. So for this I would use about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of vanilla, depending upon how, you know, much flavor you want in there. I'm kind of heavy-handed with vanilla, so I'll go with about a teaspoon. And then usually I put in the Lakanto to taste. You know, I don't like things real sweet, and so this is one of the times when I won't measure it. I'll just put it in about a half a cup at a time until it gets to the point where it's sweet enough, but not cloyingly sweet for me. And remember, this Lakanto powdered is twice the sweetness of sugar, so you want to be very careful not to overdo it. So if a recipe says 6 cups of powdered sugar, you definitely don't want to do that. You know? And that's pretty much it, the process. From here is what I would use to ice this while it's still hot. And then it'll melt down into that, and then you have that nice gooey. But this is the sticky buns, and so we would do it for the next one. Also, Patty suggested possibly putting the pumpkin puree into it and actually giving it a nice pumpkin flavor as you top the cinnamon rolls. So we could do that for both the cinnamon rolls as well as for the scones. So I'll have a thing here, and people can ice your own scones or cinnamon rolls, depending upon what it is that you want, okay? But that's the whole process, and and it makes a beautiful icing if you want to do cupcakes, as well as for cinnamon rolls and just really whatever else you need to do, okay? But that's, for me, it's the perfect ratio is 1 part butter to 2 parts cream cheese. So the toppings that we created are 1, just plain cream cheese frosting, and the other one we added a little bit of pumpkin and cinnamon in order to make it particularly festive for the fall season. But yeah, this is my favorite, as opposed to just straight cream cheese or straight buttered cream, and you can mask it a lot of different ways. Sometimes if I want a really light and fluffy icing, and I've already cooled my cake down for the icing part, then I'll do this, I'll separate it into another bowl, and then I'll actually whip cream like I would for whipped cream. And then I take the whipped cream and I fold it into the cream cheese, and it's, and it's really, really good. So it's a combination between a cream cheese frosting and like a whipped cream frosting. Yeah, and then you can flavor it however you want with chocolate or any kind of spices or seasoning, that kind of stuff as well. Okay.